Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to Rules of Engagement, a new MLG show about StarCraft 2 analysis with me, Nick Axelav-Ranish, as your host. We're still in our first week of this show. Our first Wednesday episode will be coming at you today, which is going to be Mechanics of the Bazaar. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about what the show is about in general. Rules of Engagement, I just mentioned, is an analysis show where we look at specific tactics or basic concepts, whatever it is for the daily theme. We discuss them in depth, break it down for you viewers back at home. Let's take a look at our weekly overview for the show. Every Monday, we're going to have Talking Tactics. If you missed that episode, that was our first episode. Earlier this week, we had that exactly 2 days ago. You can catch those VODs at MLG.tv. In fact, you can catch the VODs for all these shows at MLG.tv shortly after the episode is aired. Talking Tactics, we look at pro-level games, break down what tactics they use, and exactly how you can use those tactics at home to enhance your gameplay. Tuesday, yesterday's episode, Developing Fundamentals, the very basic core concepts of the game, how to get started playing. This show is going to develop every week. It's slightly more advanced. So the first week, really introductory stuff. We're going to build on it next week, going to be a little more advanced, and hopefully it'll be a great way if you have friends or if you yourself, are feeling maybe you're missing some of the basic concepts of the game that can really help boost your gameplay. Check out that show. And of course today, Mechanics of the Bazaar, more pro games, but this time pro games where they do stuff a little bit funny, a little bit strange, looking at, why those builds work in that case and why they're not used very often. Tomorrow, Thursday, we have Community Critique. Make sure to submit all of your replays. If you lost, you don't know why. If you won, you want to brag about it. Whatever reason you want to have your replay on air and analyzed, send that replay. MajorLeagueGaming.com/replays is where you submit it. I'll check it out. Thursday, we will look at those games and see, it's kind of like basically talking tactics, except it's going to be community submitted replays, your guys' replays at home instead of the professional replays. So, today we have Mechanics of the Bazaar. Let's take a look at what we have in store for that. We've got today's topics, Thor Push versus Protoss. It's going to start with a QXC versus Tadoro game, Thor Push. Don't see it too often, but it was used at the MLG 2012 tournament in the QXC versus Tadoro match. We can take a look at that one. Then, going on to Mass Phoenix PvP. I've seen a couple other pros use it, but the best replay I found was one of my own. So, throwing my replay on there against, I think it was on Europe or something like that. But really fun and cool to use PvP strategy. Then we're going to close the show out. Well, not a third replay we're going to look at is going to be about ZVP Night Display. Again, from the MLG 2012 Fall Championship Tournament at Dallas. Lenok versus Oz. Lenok, of course, got second place in that tournament. Very, very top player. He used this there. You can use it at home. We're going to show you why it works, when to use it, and why you don't see it all the time. Following up, the last segment of the day will be the Q&A. You can submit all your questions throughout this show to me on Twitter at ISAxelav. At the end of this show, whatever questions I get, we're going to be saving the last few minutes to answer those questions. So anytime I go over a topic, I'm like, well, maybe I glossed over it a little bit. Maybe I don't articulate it quite well enough for you. Just send me that question saying, hey, I thought this point was interesting, but I didn't quite get it. Can you clarify a little bit? Or if there's just a totally new, thing maybe I don't mention. Like, you mentioned this strategy has this weakness, but I've tried this at home and I lost to this. How come you didn't mention that as a potential weakness? So any of those type of questions, shoot them over at me. We'll answer them, and that'll be the end of the show. But before we get to the end of the show, we got to start at the beginning with the Thor Push versus Protoss, QXC versus Tadoro. Let's get it started over here on Ohana. So we're going to look at this through QXC's viewpoint. And he does this on Ohana. Ohana is a great map to do this build because it's a short walking distance, which is the key part. But before we get into exactly why he did that build, let's actually take a look at how we're going to explore the build. So we're going to start off with the build philosophy. This is basically the whole concept behind the build. And the build philosophy of this is that, okay, you're a Terran player. There's a lot of scary units you have, right, that Protoss has. There's a lot of Terran players who say, you know what, late game versus Protoss, they have Colossi, they have Templar. I don't want to get to that point. But you know what, early game, I have these little guys. Only 50 minerals with really, really high damage. Very strong combat unit, the Marine. And we'll actually zoom in on him, get a nice little close up there. The Marines are really, really strong as a basic unit. But once Colossi and Templar come out, they're in big, big trouble. So you want to attack early. But what happens if you try to attack too early? Well, Protoss has these little guys over here. These little sentry units. And these guys can basically prevent your Marines from getting up the ramp, and your attack with Marines is going to be totally useless. And if you wait for medevacs, often the Colossi should be out in time, or they'll have feedback or charge or some type of tech to deal with you. So you don't want to wait quite that long. You know, the 9:30, 9-minute medevac, you can push out just a little bit faster with this big boy right here. So the concept of this build, the Thor push, boom. Thor, he squishes force fields. You guys know that at home. Massive units walk over force fields. The whole point of Thor is just to get your Marines in the picture. Of course, he's a great tank, great combat unit as well, but the main purpose there is to allow those Marines to do the damage as they want. So, one thing I kind of going to skip over the beginning of the build because that's a lot of kind of a little bit dry details. And if you guys want to test out this build, it's off of a Gases Expand. If you want to know the exact build order, on the VODs at MLG.TV, you can find a VODs of this show a couple hours after it airs. There's going to be links to all these replays in the VOD description. So even if you saw the show, you don't want to check out the VOD, go to MLG.TV, look at the VOD description, and that's where you can find the links to these replays so you can really learn the exact build order. But for now, we're just going to talk about the concept of the build. So he pushes out. The idea is you get combat shield and a bunch of Marines, and you hit right when the first door comes out. And now here's a choice, right? How many SCVs do you pull? You have to pull some SCVs, or else it doesn't make sense. One of the strongest aspects of the Thor is that he gets repaired so fast. So you really want to pull some SCVs at least to repair him. The question is we can see the way QXC does this, he pulls 7 SCVs. Some players, they might empty out. You know, QXC's still got, let's see, he has a total of 41 SCVs for the Terran player right here. Some players would like to pull about 20, 21 SCVs with this push. And I think that's fine. If you want to make it a more of a commitment, totally fine to do that. But QXC says, you know what? I'm just going to pull 7 just to repair the guy, and we're going to use him as the main purpose of the tank. So wait for the Thor to get up the ramp. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and he's going to push up straight up ahead here. And remember, the whole concept of this, we're going to pause it again, is look at this Protoss army, right? This is right before Protoss generally has Colossi out. Usually their Colossi pops out more about the 10-minute mark at the fastest. There are some builds that get out a little bit faster. Sometimes there'll be one no-range Colossi out when you hit. But in general, this is a great option because they're just going to have mostly gateway units. And Marines are actually very strong against gateway units. These Marines, people think Stalkers counter them. Stalkers only counter Marines if they can keep kiting them. If you're in a Protoss base, the Marines are actually very good against Stalkers or Zealots. What they're weak to is things like force fields. You keep them right behind a store, and there's really no place they can put force fields. You could try to force field back here, then you gotta grab your Thor and backs him a couple squares, and he can squash those force fields. And the Thor also does this great damage. He's gonna kind of use him to shelter your Marines around. And notice the positioning. Very important when you do this build. You want to keep your Marines around the Thor. The reason why you want to do that is because Stalkers, like I mentioned, they can kite Marines. If your Marines are way up here and your Thor's down here, the Stalkers can pick at the Marines and then back up. I mean, in this case, they can't back up too far, but maybe let's say you're walking up the ramp, you have Marines here and the Thor is here. The Stalkers could be picking at them, backing up to here, shooting, backing up, just giving them free damage. If they're around the Thor, anytime Stalkers try to get close, that Thor is going to lay out a massive 60 damage volley, really put a dent in that Stalker count. And the whole idea of this build is basically do economic damage. So right here, the Doros is forced to pull probes, right? And even though he's going to focus down this Thor very quickly, which is the correct thing, because if he doesn't focus down early, he won't have enough DPS to actually out-damage or repair later on. But in the process, he loses quite a bit of probes. So even though it looks like he's going to hold us, there's a few Marines left versus plenty of gateway units, almost more gateway units than there are Marines. If you take a look at the units lost tab, it shows that the Doros lost quite a bit more than QXC because of all those very expensive probes. In fact, he's lost 24 probes, which puts him at 25 versus 49. QXC was even able to retreat most of his repairing SCVs right after that Thor died. So this is really an economic damage hit. Now, we're going to pause it right here real quick and talk about a couple different possibilities that can happen as a follow-up for this build. So there's some situations. One is right behind us, right? In fact, let's actually back it up just a little bit because the follow-ups happen as the build's going on. This is the way Terran works, is whatever you build right now during the attack is not going to obviously help your attack. So your follow-up plan is already in action, right? QXC went for a starport and looks like 2 more barracks. He's going to 5 barracks, 1 starport. A very standard 2-base powering play from Terran. This is the catch-all. If you don't know exactly what situation you're in, go for this play, and you're never going to be in a bad spot. Of course, it's not very greedy, it's not very unique, but if you think you're ahead, the best way to finish off a game is this play. In this situation, he knows, remember, 24 workers killed, he's ahead. Great option to follow just a standard 2 base, heavy bio play. A couple other options. One is he could take a very fast third, which means the instant he was moving out, probably maybe about after he started at Thor, basically, his next money goes to a third command center before the starport is even built. That third command center would probably be almost done now if he did that strategy. I would recommend even putting up third command center on the low ground right here. If you're going to do that, though, I would also recommend getting siege shanks, right? This factory used to be right here on this tech lab. Get some siege shanks. You can place, a couple of siege shanks right here, maybe one down here, and you can use those to really help protect the third against a potential counterattack. That way you maintain your economic advantage throughout the game. The other option, last option, is to continue going Thors and bio units. So in that option, you would still get the starport, but you would keep the factory on a tech lab, maintain Thor production. I would say don't go pure Marine Thor. Add in Marauders too, because you do need to deal with late game Protoss tech. But that option can work. Thors are never bad, but I think I like QXC's response. I mean, he's obviously practiced, but I think his response is probably the best, barring maybe the fast third tank type defensive style. Could be another option, but if you like to be, if you pick this build, it's because you like to be aggressive. So follow up with another aggressive play. It's more in the nature of your skill set, most likely. Now, the last part we're going to talk about these unique builds is, could this become a standard build, right? What are its potential weaknesses? Well, let's actually rewind. Sorry, I meant to say rewind. I said fast forward to right about before he's about to hit. We're gonna look at the 9-minute mark. His army's on the move, and what did Dodoro do? What made this build work? That's the important part to know right here. And what Dodoro did is he went really fast double forge, right? A very standard, 1-gate expansion, 3 gates robo double forge. It's a very standard play. Creator popularized it a while back. It's starting to lose some popularity among the top level players, but it still is a very popular build. You probably see about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Protoss vs. Terran games if you watch high level StarCraft. So this is almost a perfect situation for QXC because these upgrades, they're not going to complete before the attack hits, and it's fairly expensive, right? Both these forges, 150 minerals each upgrade 100 minerals, 100 gas each. That's total of 700 minerals. 500 minerals and 200 gas that is basically being spent in stuff that will add 0 value to Dodoro's defense. Now, if Dodoro instead was currently boosting out immortals, he'd have 1 or 2 immortals to support his defense. That doesn't mean QXC loses, though. Honestly, Dodoro could, let's actually jump into the engagement. If Dodoro had his exact same number of gateway units here, scan, he sees what's going on. If he had the exact same number of gateway units here and 1 immortal, you know what? He would still have to pull probes to hold this attack. This gateway unit immortal, they're not going to beat this army without probe support, because what happens if the immortal does the same DPS as 3 zealots to Thor. For you guys' reference, it's 33 DPS, and zealots are something like, well, they're 12, but then Thor has an armor, so it's more closer to 10, a little over 10. So three zealots is pretty much equal to 1 Thor in DPS. But if Thor has the range, he can close in sooner. But if Thor alone can't out damage this SCV repair. And if Dodoro doesn't pull the probes, the Zealots, which are the rest of his good DPS, of course he only has 2 of them here, which is a little bit unfortunate, they're going to evaporate instantly to the Marines. And then what's next? The Sentries, the Stalkers, he's going to lose his damage output very, very fast, and by the time the Thor dies, he's actually going to be in a world of trouble. So even if he had the Immortal out a little bit faster, he would still need to pull probes in this situation. So no matter what, QXC's in a good position against the build Dodoro did. Now, let's talk about builds that might put QXC in a rough spot. Dodoro, if you rushed out of Colossi and he cut probes to get a lot of gateway units as well, he could have this number of gateway units right here and a Colossi done, right? I just talked about how much resources these forges were. This was 500 minerals, 200 gas. 200 could have been spent on a support bay. And then the rest of those resources, he has another 300 minerals. That could be the mineral cost at a Colossi. And then let's say he has like 2 less sentries here. Or maybe or actually more realistic, he had 4 less stalkers, and those would be more zealots. So he'd be more zealot heavy, less stalker heavy, and he'd have a Colossi. And that's the type of army that when QXC sees this, and he scans up there, he may not want to engage a mass zealot Colossi army. It's a little bit tricky. I think he still would want to. I think he'd still trade favorably. But Dodoro would not have to pull the probes because he has so many zealots there to tank for him, and the Colossi can deal with the Marines very efficiently. So I think that would be the one problem this build could run into. Maybe why you don't see it as a standard build, but it's a great build to add into your play. Now let's actually talk about The process I use here to dissect this build, okay? The first thing is you try to figure out the philosophy of the build. What's the whole course behind it, right? The build philosophy of this is Marines beat gateway units. How can I get Marines to fight gateway units before the classes come into play? I need to deal with force fields. That's where the Thor comes in. Then possible follow-ups. We looked at that. We think the 2-base mass medevac bio is the best follow-up. I mean, you could come with a different analysis zero. And the important thing is you go through this thought process with these builds. Last one is, can it become standard? What could they do that this build might not work against? Use this process to dissect your own builds, and I think you're going to find that you'll actually be able to improve them without even having to grind out quite as many practice games. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with a Mass Phoenix PvP creative build.